Hi, everybody. Welcome to another edition of BioJacked Radio with your host, Kiefer. Unfortunately, Alex Navarro is not here with us today, but we have Jonathan Watson from PropaneFitness.com on with us, and he's got apparently a shit ton of questions. So, would you say hi, Jonathan?
Hi, everyone.
Do you want to give an introduction about yourself and Propane Fitness a little bit?
Yeah, sure. Firstly, as you can probably tell from my accent, I'm based in the UK, as is Propane Fitness. And what Propane Fitness is a blog that myself and two others started while we were at university, basically because we got loads of questions from people. We all started off fairly interested in training and diet and losing weight, gaining weight in the right ways, and got loads of questions and decided to make a blog out of it. And we're all kind of self-taught, but love reading Kiefer's stuff and love helping people out. We train some clients and use Carb Back-Loading, Carb Nite, and similar things. So that's a pretty brief summary, but yeah, that's what we do.
Cool. I've seen progress pics of you guys and your clients on your site. It looks like you guys are doing some great things over there.
Oh well, that's nice that you think so, but not quite not quite as impressive as some of your pictures, but we're working on it.
So are you still with Propane Fitness? Because I know you're graduating soon from university if you haven't already.
Yeah, I graduated in summer and
Right.
I've started a job fairly recently, like a 9 to 5 job. So I'm still involved, as is Youssef and Ben. I think you've spoken to Youssef before, haven't you? When we interviewed you a while ago.
Yeah.
We all have jobs on the side, or rather, we all have jobs at the same time as Propane, but we still write articles, still train people. It's just a little bit less of a focus for us right at the moment, as we're kind of just getting into new jobs, which isn't great. But yeah,
Right.
I'm
Yeah.
I'm currently suffering the pains of sitting down between 9 and 5 every day. So it's having a nightmare with my squat and deadlift and things like that.
Yeah.
Um,
It wreaks havoc on the hips.
it does, it does. Um, is that I imagine you stay. Are you sort of at a computer all day, Kiefer?
Yes, unfortunately I do.
Yeah.
I've been trying to come up with ways like every day that I can get into the gym, and I try to do this every day. I'll actually use the angled leg press machine to try to wake some stuff up, and I'll just run through the stack on that for 10 reps at 6 or 7 different sets, and then I'll do some hip thrusters to stretch out my hip flexors and get my glutes moving again. And then on leg day, I'll move from that into whatever my leg training routine is for the day.
Okay. So because that's one thing I've found is that after sitting down for a long time, it takes a while to kind of get things going again. Whereas previously, I mean, when you're at university, as I'm sure you know, your life revolves around what time your training session is. Um, Whereas now it's like, you fit it in when you can, and I find it difficult to kind of get activated and in the zone for training.
Yeah, it definitely takes some preparation, which, you know, I used to love, just like I'm sure you did, just being able to go in the gym and you're pretty much ready, 1 or 2 warm-up sets and you're ready to start working. But, now, gosh, my warm-up lasts almost as long as my workout, it seems like.
Yeah. No, it's not good. It's not good.
Plus, I think I'm
Um,
like a decade older than you are, maybe probably even more. So that makes an even bigger difference.
well, yeah, I'm 22, so I'm still quite young. I won't ask how old you are.
Yeah, I've got
That
like
would be rude.
16 years on you.
Right, okay. Well, you've probably got that probably shows in your bench press performance, so
Yeah, it might
I
a
would.
little bit.
Um, but yeah, I wouldn't be too hard on yourself for that. I think you're doing pretty well if you've still been going for 16 years.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, so should we get into some of the questions that I have?
Yeah. So,
Yeah.
is there any context to any of these, or am I just going to be barraged with tons of different subjects?
Well, there is context. It's essentially it's questions that our clients tend to ask us most frequently. Because we use, I don't know whether you've seen the propane protocol that we have on our website. I think you
Uh, y-
shared it a while ago
yeah, I
on Facebook.
glanced at it, and
Yeah,
I don't know if it's evolved because that was, gosh, that seems like almost a year ago that I shared that on
yeah,
Facebook.
it was a while ago. So essentially, that is our both reading around the internet, particularly your information, combined with like our own experience. So we're not I don't think we're not saying that we've come up with all of the information. We do acknowledge you and other coaches at the end of the article. And it's kind of what we found works, all combined together. And then so from that and both that and carb backloading is what we predominantly use with our clients, and we get kind of the same questions coming up over and over again,
Okay.
um, which we try and answer as best we can. But we thought, what better than while we've got you, why not ask you and see what the actual answer is, I guess.
All
Yeah.
right. Well, I'll try to give
So
you the actual answer if it exists.
yeah, but I mean, it's mainly nutritional based, as I'm sure you guessed.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, I had a hunch.
okay. All right. Well, I'll jump into it then. The first question is regarding fat intake with backloading.
Okay.
Um, Now I know you've written. There's an article you wrote on your website about how you should backload the fat within the backload, so
Y-
to speak.
yes.
So I think we all understand that. There's no kind of question over that. It's more, is there some inherent benefit to having fat within a backload, or would a low fat backload be the optimal situation if
I
you?
Other than for caloric load, there's not necessarily a large benefit to getting a lot of fat in the backload, other than possibly your last meal.
Okay.
The it's more just a one thing in particular in the last meal is you want to provide your body with the fuel to actually make it through the night, but not fuel that's going to disrupt all your hormone release. So fat is a great candidate for that, and fat will also help to prevent you from going catabolic in your protein, in your muscle tissue and organ tissue for that matter. So the fat more than anything is just a way to help you get into the evening without any lull, without screwing up your hormonal reactions that you should normally have, and without tapping into protein reserves prematurely. Because if you were to do an all protein and carb backload, then you're pretty much going to end the night in this heightened state of carb utilization. So glucagon levels are probably going to be up. Your carb levels are going to go down relatively fast. And then all of a sudden you're in this scenario where your body's looking for something to convert into glycogen. It will into glucose. So it will convert some of your glycogen stores. That's what glucagon does. But glucagon's also very adept at chewing up some of those amino acids and turning them into glucose as well.
Okay. So would another benefit of it also be to do with satiety, in that obviously carbohydrate intake will shut off ghrelin production in the short term, and as I understand it, fat would be more satiating past that point, rather than if you were to just have a protein and carb meal.
That is correct. Although most of the time, what I've found with people and with myself too is regardless of that fat load, especially the last meal, I'm usually the carbs make me so sleepy that I'm just out. So as far as being satiated through the evening, that's never been a problem either way, whether you are backloading your fat or whether you're trying to go for a very clean backload and eat nothing but carbs.
Right. I think one thing we found, I personally have a similar experience to what you just described, but some of our clients experience the sort of rebound hypoglycemia when they just use sort of a carb dominant feed, and often adding fat in that instance can help with that, is what we've noticed.
Yeah, if you wake up a few hours after going to sleep and the sheets are drenched, you need to start considering a different method of backloading, which is just what you said, adding some fat in the last backload there. I'll help you take care of that.
Okay.
Because that's the scenario I just described. Basically, what's happened is you had this glucose burst. Now your insulin levels are still up, but glucose has subsided, so your body's trying to figure out what to do, and it can throw you hypoglycemic, which if it gets really bad, you'll get the sweats, you'll start the shakes. That will usually wake you up, but in extreme cases, it will actually keep you passed out. You will stay passed out through that, and you won't really know unless somebody was there in bed with you, because that happened to me a couple times where apparently I went through the shakes in the middle of the night, and I had no idea. I slept right through it.
Wow. Okay. So that's an argument for ice cream then.
Yes. Very good argument for ice cream.
Okay. But with regards to actually metabolic advantage, or from a fat loss perspective particularly, there's no inherent benefit to having the fat there other than what you've just described. It's not. I think one thing that we perhaps considered was that you would switch quicker over to fat metabolism during the night and then wake up in a kind of a more potent ketotic state the next day, as opposed to if you just eaten carbs and let your body kind of get back to metabolizing fat on its own, if you see what I'm saying.
Yeah, I would argue that if that's what you're looking for, that not eating fat would probably throw you into a ketogenic state faster.
Okay.
In the middle of the night, for better or for worse, you would be in deep ketosis. There's really nothing has come out in the research yet to show an advantage of having the fat in the backload. It's more of, other than the one you described, it's kind of more of the idea is there is no downside. So that's kind of where the state of research is at the moment. The problem is nobody's really doing these kind of studies, particularly with extremely active people. So it's hard to answer a lot of these questions. Like, it's even really hard. There's like 1 or 2 studies that have just looked at, okay, if you eat high glycemic carbs right before bed as opposed to low glycemic carbs right before bed, what will that do to your hormone response first thing in the morning when you eat again? I mean, so even studies like that could answer a lot of questions, there's like 1 or 2 of those. So it's hard to kind of, because as you can imagine and as you know from working with clients, there's, probably 20 different scenarios you can come up with for how someone will backload. And then, figuring out all the possible interplays and then the consequences through the night and the next day, we really need some good research for that. And right now what you're doing, working with clients, paying attention to clients and paying attention to yourselves is really the best way to get the answers, particularly for that individual client.
Okay. I guess the one other issue with regards to fat intake, and this is more of a question with regards to fat intake across the day, is that in the article you described how fat in the last meal of a backload isn't a concern because fatty acid levels in the blood won't have risen from that meal while insulin is still elevated. And I think the go-to question that people usually ask after that is, what happens if, assuming a backloading template, what happens if you eat a meal at, say, 4 p.m., which is high in longer chain fatty acids like butter or oils,
right?
And then backload at 7? Aren't those fatty acids going to be released into the blood as you're then spiking insulin?
Yes, that should be the normal timing course. That's why most of the plans I structure around that are either the last burst of those long chain fatty acids is usually 2 hours before starting training. That way, assuming your training is going to last roughly an hour, you should be burning through those fatty acids during your actual training session.
Okay.
And then immediately, if I'm putting in a pre-workout shake, which is rare, that almost always is MCT oil. So coconut oil is what I'll put into that to make sure that you get that burst of fatty acids right away through your workout and you don't have a big carryover later in the evening.
Okay, and that actually is the plan that I personally prescribe to people involves the last sort of meal with longer chain fatty acids of being about 1 or 2 o'clock,
Oh yeah, that's
and then
perfect.
switching over to MCTs
That's
after
perfect.
that. So yeah, I know you mentioned in I think it was an interview you did with Tanner Fox. You spoke about fatty acid transporters being overactive after training, um, which I think is lipoprotein lipase would be overactive post training.
So there's different. So the lipoprotein lipase system is actually distinct from fatty acid transporters.
Okay.
Fatty acid transporters, I can't speak a lot about them because they're a pretty recent discovery. We know very little. We know they're activated in muscle tissue with training, just like glute transporters, but exactly what fatty acids they're most adept at carrying into and how those are utilized after being carried into the cell. Like, for example, are they instantly thrown in for energy use, or are they more likely to be stored as intramuscular triglycerides? Yeah, I can't really answer a lot of those questions. We just have a greater capacity to dispose of fatty acids in our muscle tissue post-training with the
Okay.
fatty acid transporters. But you do have this LPL HSL switch, which can happen during training. I've been looking into the research in it because a lot of people have been claiming that training skyrockets LPL and muscle tissue right away, and I haven't seen the evidence for that. And it might be out there, and I might just haven't dug deep enough yet. But from the people saying that, I doubt they've dug deep enough either
Okay.
to find that information. So I'm a little unclear on the exact dynamics of LPL in that very short window. I know over time, training will increase LPL content in muscle tissue. Um, but
Okay.
but you know what is that immediately around training? There's some suspicion that these studies they've been doing where carb backloading is working without training, where they're just putting sedentary people on carb backloading and they're getting like great fat loss, they're preserving their muscle tissue, they're getting all these great biomarkers are improving. And the idea there is that as you go longer without carbohydrates, specifically without insulin, then there's some interesting shifts that happen. HSL, hormone-sensitive lipase, increases significantly in fat cells, and LPL significantly decreases. But then the opposite happens in muscles. In muscles, LPL increases, so your muscle's ability to absorb fats increases, but HSL decreases. So your muscles can't actually release the triglycerides back into the bloodstream as easily. And that coupled with the role of the catecholamines when you train is probably another thing that accelerates carb backloading, even if you were to ignore the GLUT4 phenomenon. And then I think that also helps to explain what is happening in those sedentary populations who are still getting results, even though they're not training at all. And
And I'm assuming that's that's not with an energy surplus. That would be assuming an energy deficit with that setup.
that is correct. In those studies,
Yeah.
they are at an energy deficit.
Okay. But that's still very positive research, right? To say that just simply backloading carbs is there is some benefit to doing that, even if you don't train. That's a big has big implications for the rest of the population that aren't involved in exercise frequently.
Yes, very big
Yeah.
implications.
Cool.
That might have
So
been
the
more
next
of an answer than you were looking for, but I hope that helped.
no, it's great. It's great. This is exactly what people are looking for. So it's fantastic. Um, the the question that kind of follows on in keeping with carb backloading would just be that at what point, it's a bit of a difficult question to answer this, I guess, but at what point do you think frequency of carb feeding starts to inhibit fat loss? And do you ever diet people to stage condition keeping carbs in their diet every day?
Oh wow, that's I would say one thing that determines what halts fat loss is the amount of carb feedings, but also how much muscle mass you have. For example, take some of the power lifters I work with. These guys have tons of muscle, and they'll get to the point where they're backloading every night, and they're still losing body fat, which they don't want. You know, they're trying to maintain their weight because they're coming up to a meet. But then you take a female, and if females try to carb backload every night, particularly because they don't have as much muscle mass, they inhibit fat loss pretty strongly at times. So it's more how much muscle you have, and then from that, it's very individualized. I'm finding that counterintuitively, especially since I'm relying on carb backloading, the GLUT4 effect that's specifically triggered by resistance training. It's interesting. Some people are getting far better results, both fat loss and strength gains, by not eating the carbs immediately after their workout. They'll instead just spike insulin levels somehow, either with leucine, hydrolysates. That's when somebody might add in some MCTs to get an even bigger insulin response, which has benefits and downsides. And then the next day, when they're not training, is when they have their large carb feeds. So they'll only eat carbohydrates the night before a big training session instead of planning it after their training sessions. I have some explanations for that pan out in the research. The exact mechanisms, again, until there's very clear research done, we can't say. But there is an explanation for why that would work and why it would work particularly better for some people than others. So there's so many variables there. I can't just answer as to how frequently or infrequently will cause fat gain or fat loss. I mean, it really varies. Some people dial in on 2 carb backloads a week, which are almost talking about an optimized Carb Nite at that point. Others, are literally backloading every night. Even people who don't have incredible amounts of muscle mass, they're backloading every night, and they're maintaining their leanness that they want. So it's hard for me to just give a single answer to, obviously. Now, dieting somebody down for the stage using carb backloading, that has happened a few times, never with female clients. Female clients take a very particular diet to get to the stage, but they do have carbs every day in that instance. It's an interesting modification of CBL combined with Carb Nite. So, and I'm not going to give that out right now.
That's fair enough. I'm glad, to be honest, that you we always answer these questions with, oh well, that depends on who you are and what you're doing and what your sort of stats are. But I'm glad that you've kind of confirmed that, because I think people generally get frustrated with the answer, it depends.
Yeah, they want a very, very strict guideline. It's just like, tell me exactly what to do. And it's like, well, I can't tell you exactly what to do because you're different than the last 10 people I worked with. And you're going to be different than the next 10 people I work with. So I can give you some basics, but we got to figure it out from there.
Especially, I imagine, I would have thought that your audience is very broad in comparison to ours. I think, because Carb Nite was originally pitched at almost a housewife or the sedentary population, wasn't it? And then
correct.
Carb Back-Loading is more of a performance diet. So you've already targeted two vastly different populations.
Yes, and it causes a lot of headaches.
I can imagine. So kind of a follow-on question from that then would be that I think that the way that most people view Carb Nite and Carb Backloading is that they fall on this kind of spectrum where the carb feeding frequency and magnitude is the variable that changes. So the question is, at what point would the frequency of carb feedings change the system which you are capitalizing on? So how frequent would the carb feedings have to be such that you are no longer using the hormonal rhythms of Carb Nite and more the biomolecular rhythms of carb backloading?
That's going to occur for most people at around three carb nights or 3 backloads a week.
Right.
At that point, you've started to disrupt the hormonal cycles that you're trying to take advantage of. That's probably, and there will be a new book that might not even make it out for a couple years, but it is essentially a blueprint of exactly how to construct your ideal diet for your life. And it doesn't matter what you do. It will help you construct the ideal diet for what you do. And there's that sweet spot that takes some time to figure out, but it rides between carb backloading and Carb Nite, where you are still getting some of the hormonal advantages, the weekly hormonal advantages, obviously over a shorter time frame, but you're still able to utilize the biomolecular advantages that carb backloading presents. And for some people, especially those who are casual lifters, and by casual lifter, I mean somebody who has an office job all day and they just go to the gym to stay looking good, it's actually not that hard to find their sweet spot where they can continue to trim down, especially if they have a lot of fat, and maintain or increase their muscle mass and just feel good all the time. So most of the time it occurs at about 3 backloads a week is when you start really forcing yourself to rely on the mechanisms of carb backloading and not so much on the mechanisms of Carb Nite. If you're only doing 2 a week with Carb Nite, odds are you're still getting huge hormonal advantages.
Okay. So that would almost be the crossover point then between carb backloading and Carb Nite, then, as it were, at three backloads a week, and less frequent than that, you start entering the Carb Nite area of the spectrum.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Okay. So this morning I posted that I would be appearing on BioJacked and asked if anybody had any questions, and there was sort of 15 questions within 5 minutes. But one question in particular that caught my eye was that regarding the timing of fish oil on carb backloading.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that you've recommended taking it all day. Would that be correct? Or throughout the day, rather, in small amounts?
That is correct.
Yeah. So I think it was Ben has responded to the question by suggesting that you would take fish oil when you eat carbs to drive the N6 fatty acids into fat cells. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, you want the fish oil for the N3 fatty acids, not the N6.
Okay.
And it's very interesting. So I learned this all the way back in Carb Nite, and there's been some new information that I haven't been able to keep as up to date on as I wanted, but there's very interesting chemical dynamics of cells, period. And different, as you can imagine, different molecular structures can pass through more easily than others. And it turns out that the N3 fatty acids in fish oil are the most difficult fatty acid to get into a fat cell. But they're also the easiest to release. So kind of the idea there is the benefits of the omega-3s are so great in trying to incorporate them into fat cells, tissue repair, ligament repair, being anti-inflammatory, that there really is no downside to eating them all day. And that's been shown in basically, mixed diet studies where they replace saturated fats and omega-6 fatty acids with just all fish oil, and things go really well. As far as having mega dosages of fish oil all day, I wouldn't recommend that. But a small amount all day long, I think, especially because in Western cultures our diet's so shitty, the advantages far outweigh any possible downside. And it is also, like I said, the hardest fat to get into fat cells. So already you've set up a situation where you're introducing a fat that's more likely to be used for beneficial purposes than storage.
Okay. And I think from what I remember, you recommend about 10 to 15 grams, don't you?
Yeah.
within that range.
Yeah, a day. So, usually it's I usually do 5-5 for the first two meals of the day, do 5 and 5, and then usually in the last meal is when I have them take their last load of fish oils.
Okay, great. Well, I think that clears that up. The other main question that came from Facebook was your views on pre, intra, and post-workout nutrition for both size and strength. And I think this has arisen because in some interviews, I think you've mentioned how you would occasionally introduce carbs pre-workout or intra-workout.
Correct.
And I think that's people are kind of wanting a clarification on when that would be the case. So is it to do with training time or training volume, or is it an individual thing?
It's it's slightly individualized, but it's more in tune with there's a couple of things. There's an individual component. I've found a lot of people have difficulty, especially when they're bigger, more muscular, have some very, very serious performance goals. They have a hard time getting in the carbohydrates post training, and almost every combination we could come up with made them feel sick. So introducing carbs pre-training about an hour before, and oddly enough, this is going to contradict some of the things I said earlier. I usually have them do stuff like peanut butter and jelly sandwich or some combination like that actually has some fat with the carbs. A lower glycemic meal so they get a longer kind of glucose curve out of it. And then it settles not only do they have greater performance during their workout, it settles their stomach after their workout too. The exact explanations, I don't know. It could be that huge flux of glucose immediately after is somewhat irritating to the duodenum or jejunum or something where you get a lot of absorption. Who knows the exact effect, but I have noticed that that's pretty common. So that's one instance where I'll put in some kind of carb meal before training.
Okay.
Usually right before, like instantly before training, I will almost never do that. What I will have them do, if I do, it's a meal like just pure protein powder and fatty and MCT oil. Very rarely, never have I told somebody to have carbs right before their workout. But in their workout, and this is particularly true with a modification of Carb Nite that I've used for people prepping for contests, which is what I said, you can carb backload all the way to contest level, but it's very, very different. I'll introduce carbohydrates about 30 minutes into that training session, and it's a very simple glucose with just pure protein powder, and they will actually sip on that so that they're finished with it by the end of their workout. So they're ingesting just a steady stream of simple carbs and protein throughout the entire workout. And then actually post-training, they won't consume any more carbs. If they do, it's a very, very small load of some kind of carb plus their big load of protein powder, but they won't consume carbs after that. That's specifically for getting. I mean, you can get very shredded on that and maintain your muscle mass and size while preparing for a contest. And then the other scenario is you just got massive training volume. You're training for an hour and a half plus. Then again, I will introduce that same kind of scenario, that shake within the first half hour to hour of your training session to help carry you through the training session, start to get some of those metabolic advantages, and then prep you for the carb you're going to eat afterwards.
Okay. So
my answers are like 400 times longer than your questions.
no, that's exactly what we want. But I think that'll answer people's questions sufficiently. I think the thing I've personally found is that I find if I introduce carbs pre-training, it reduces my performance during the training session.
Yes.
And I work better on low carb. Another thing I've actually found is that I know you've written before about the Hulk effect in your articles.
Mm-hmm.
And I know sometimes that before, if I train later than usual, I'll get that kind of insulin dump around the time that I would usually train,
Yeah.
and get like a very hot flush kind of feeling. Is that something you've ever experienced or you've ever had clients experience? That happens before a training session rather than during?
I have not had that. Not that anybody's reported to me. You would be the first.
Okay.
So you're actually having like a timed insulin response even without eating the carbs, and that's because you're training later than you normally can. Is that
Well,
am I?
sorry, it's I wouldn't say it was an insulin response. It's more that it's kind of like a hot kind of wired feeling rather than, and it happens around the same time that I would normally begin training. Like
Right.
on a day,
Okay.
for example. Do you understand what I mean?
Yes. Yeah. And
Yeah.
that kind of rhythm I've seen stuck in a few people.
Right.
Where they've suddenly switched out their, especially if they don't eat any carbs before training or during their training session. There's like this kind of hardwired timing on when they're going to experience that, and I've experienced too, where just like all of a sudden I get a little shaky. I feel my heart rate going up, and it's like my body is ready to work out, and it's like ready to throw some weight across the room, and here I am like sitting at a desk.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's frustrating because when that happens, when you begin a training session, it often works out. PB is fantastic, but when you're stuck at work and you feel that happening, it's just like, damn it.
Yeah.
Um, why am I stuck at a computer when this is happening? But yeah, I guess the follow-on question from that would be, have you ever found anything to remedy the problem, or is it just something that it's a hardwired response and that's just the way it is?
It just seems to go away after a week.
Right.
So, um,
Okay.
what's weird is, everybody's really different with that Hulk effect. Some people will experience it for like a full month or 2 months, and then all of a sudden it just disappears. It's very odd. And then
Okay.
others go through this cycle where for like 2 weeks they get the huge burst during their training, and then for another 2 weeks, nothing. And then all of a sudden it comes back. So what I'm trying to figure out, what I would love to figure out, is how to make sure that it consistently happens, or that you can force it to happen at a key moment. Like if you're doing a powerlifting competition or an Olympic lifting competition, how you can force it to activate at a very particular time. And I haven't figured that out yet.
Yeah, I mean that if there was a way to sort of turn that on and off, it would be fantastic.
Oh yeah.
Um, and it was something I found that it happened an awful lot when I would before you enlightened us and told us the bad side of fasting. When I try and do the longer fasts, I'd find that I almost experience that adrenaline dump a
uh,
lot earlier than if I was to have protein and fat during the day. So it kind of allowed me to train and still perform well later during the day,
I see.
and still experience the adrenaline dump. So, um, but yeah, if there's a way to switch that on, then I'm all up for knowing about it.
Well, as soon as I figure
So
it out, I'll let you guys know.
uh, thanks. Um, from what I've read of your what you advocate for training, I know you're a fan of Christian Thibodeau's perfect rep idea, and you use that in the elect
Yes.
aspect of the shockwave protocol. What are your thoughts? I know Christian Thibodeau is a big fan of high volume training, or having as much volume without exceeding your capacity to recover, is I think the phrase he uses. What are your thoughts on high volume training for a trainee, like regardless of goal?
I think there's definite advantages. It's funny. I was just up in Seattle talking to Joel Jameson, if you know who he is.
I do, yeah.
Yeah, and we had a lot of interesting conversations on volume and all the benefits to that, even if you're not really pushing yourself that hard through all the volume. And there's capillarization effects where you have greater capillary density, which helps bring nutrients in and out faster. There's cardiac effects that are hugely advantageous for blood flow, recovery. It was really interesting talking to him about it, because in general, I'm not a huge fan of volume, but I do recognize its utility in a training program. Like if you have somebody who's low volume for too long, their results go to shit. So you do obviously need this high volume component. The problem I've always had is like, what is the optimum way to cycle between the low volume, high volume? Because obviously low volume works and can work, and some people have utilized it amazingly well. I mean, Dorian Yates, Mike Menser, and there's a lot of people, and it's not just 3 or 4. There's a lot of people who've had huge advantages to low volume training, and that's all they do. So what I want to figure out is exactly who can you identify that does better with low volume training, and for those who do better with high volume training, how do you come up with the ideal system so that they are always in a recovered state and you never push them beyond that point? And Joel offers a solution with his BioForce HRV that really helps to tell somebody what state they're in. Are they overtrained, or are they, at the perfect point to train again? So it might take a combination of data from systems like that plus experimenting with protocols to figure that out. But in general, I'm not a huge fan of high volume because I've always done better with low volume. But again, I might be the anomaly. But when I think back about all the best progress I've had, it's always this cycle. It always goes from high volume training into a low period, into a low volume regime, back to a high volume, then low volume. So there's definitely a lot of utility there. Exactly how I incorporate that is a bit of a secret until the new Shockwave protocol releases, and 2.0 will be releasing next year. That'll give some insights into how the best that research and other people's experiences have said to incorporate the high volume training.
Okay. Well, we look forward to that release.
Yeah, and you can get a little bit of a glimpse in that if you look at the bench press challenge that I released a few months ago.
Yeah, I've seen that. Yeah.
Yeah, that kind of gives you an idea of bouncing back and forth.
Okay. I've actually just ordered Joel Jameson's HRV product.
Oh, have you? Yeah.
Yeah, it really piqued my interest because while I was at university, I experimented with kind of twice a day training, using a lot of the perfect rep ideas of never going to failure and focusing on explosiveness. Very similar to what you were saying. I recently, once I started work, transitioned to a lower volume approach, similar to I imagine you've heard of dog crap.
Yes.
Yeah. I know you're not a big fan of it because of the eccentric loading portion, but I actually got very quick results with that, but found that I burnt out extremely quickly with it.
Mm-hmm.
So having some kind of system where you can you kind of take that decision away from you, and it's you use a product, it tells you how recovered you are, and you regulate your training that way rather than trying to decide for yourself all the time. Because I think everyone has their own tendencies, don't they, of either wanting to do more volume or more intensity, or so. But yeah, I look forward to getting that and trying it out.
Yeah.
Have you tried it before or not? Is it just what you've heard?
Well, I have it sitting here, and I finally got a heart rate monitor for it. So.
Okay.
Yeah. And actually, I'm not. It's not that I'm opposed to eccentric training. Actually, like the best gains I've ever gotten in my career were with a purely eccentric training system. So I'm definitely not opposed to it, but I do clearly understand its limitations because, like you said, I mean, I would be burned out in a very short amount of time if that's all I was doing, and I had to modify it so that I could get through a longer period with it. But I'm actually a huge fan of eccentric training. I'm just too much, and you kind of ruin the effects that carb backloading is based off of, specifically because it actually decreases GLUT4 content, well, T-GLUT content in muscle tissue. So you're kind of shooting yourself in the foot if you're doing a purely eccentric based training system with carb backloading. It will ultimately make it less effective.
Right. And I saw you released the heavy duty CBL, which looks like kind of a modification of the Shockwave system you released.
Correct.
With
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, correct.
Okay. And yeah, I agree. I definitely got good results from using dog crap, and I've had good results with other similar things in the past. It's a very psychologically and neurally draining thing to do for a long period of time.
Yeah.
I've found you definitely need a break from it. Okay. So one other question we had was that the difference between when you're training people, is there a difference between the protein intake you have people on when they're dieting versus when they're gaining muscle?
Not too much. I still go by what the target body weight is we're looking for, and then base everything off of that. So if they want to get bigger, then I'm using a bigger number for their protein load. If they want to get smaller, then I'm using a little smaller number for their protein load, which is counterintuitive to some people because you want to hold on to the muscle tissue. But if they're already pretty lean, which they should be if I'm training somebody, then really what I'm looking at is that end body weight goal. And I try to tune protein around that.
Okay. And is there a certain meal cadence you look at with regards to timing the protein intake? I mean, do you agree with Lane Norton's ideas of spiking protein synthesis with leucine at certain times of the day, or do you subscribe more to the idea that it's irrelevant and it's the same anabolic response in one meal as it is in 5, for example?
It really depends on the method that you're going for. For example, the idea of spiking throughout the day, I think, is a good idea, and I use that especially with people dieting down to try to make sure that they remain as anabolic as possible and not catabolic. But you have to be careful because if you just spike protein synthesis with, say, leucine and hydrolysates, which both do an excellent job of spiking the synthesis, the processes, it can actually have a negative effect if you're not providing a protein source to provide amino acids to actually cause the protein synthesis. So you can spike and potentiate the process, but then not give enough fuel to back it up. And in those cases, oddly enough, it's really interesting. A lot of research is showing that basically like eating meat or these really long releasing proteins like casein, things like that, they actually contribute as much or more to 24-hour protein synthesis than trying to spike periodically. So you can have one meal with a bunch of slow-acting protein, especially in meats, whole foods, and that can contribute as much or more to your 24-hour protein synthesis as trying to spike continually.
Okay.
There you go. There's another paradox. So I guess either method you can use will work. It's just what do you want to do? I find most of the time if I'm training somebody, especially to lean out, I'll do what's easiest for them.
Okay.
If it's
So
easy.
I mean, that kind of.
Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, I was just gonna say that ties in with I've always heard the analogy of the electricity and the light switch with regards to leucine and then protein intake. I don't know whether you've heard that before.
I'm going to guess that the light switch can turn it on, but if there's no electricity, the bulb won't turn on.
Yeah, you got it.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a fairly simple analogy, but
It's
it
perfect.
definitely seems to fit with what you're saying. Yeah.
Yeah, it's perfect.
Okay. Okay, so I got last couple of questions, I guess. I think there's a few people have heard your recent BioJacked episode with Marcy Nevin,
Yeah.
where she probed you a little bit on how you set up the macros for Carb Back-Loading and Carb Nite.
Uh-huh.
And I think in that you said that to begin Carb Nite, you would start with protein set at target body weight, as you've just explained, and then you would set fat such that it was equal calorically.
Yes, which is so it's really simple on Carb Nite. You would set up protein for 1 gram of protein per pound body weight of whatever your target goal is, and then you would set up fat at half of that.
Yeah. So I guess the follow-on question from that is that for even, a bigger person who was much heavier, that would seem like very low calories.
So it might be. One thing to keep in mind, and that a lot of people miss, especially with Carb Nite, is that you want to look over caloric deficit over not just the day but the week. And that's how you can. That's really how you quickly kind of determine it. Like the first week when they're stripping out carbs, I don't put any restrictions on calories, food, anything. I don't even make sure that their protein content is where it should be. I just make sure they're trying to eat some meats, getting in some fats, and that their carbs are extremely low. First 10 days, I just don't care. After that is where I'll start fine-tuning, and I'll take them pretty low that week and then see what's going to happen on their Carb Nite, because there's quite a few studies, and they're on very low caloric diets, VLCDs, where they're having people eat 400 calories a day for 5 or 6 days, and then they literally have them eat 12,000 or more calories in one day on the weekend, and it basically balances out through the week. So the idea is you're kind of at a caloric deficit during the week, or it might be low, and then your backload is what then respikes everything and keeps you at baseline for your metabolic needs, however you want to say it. When I started that, what I'm trying to do, particularly, remember Carb Nite, and I still, for just generic explanations, people who are on Carb Nite usually have a lot of extra body fat. That just rips the fat off of you. End of story. There's not much else you have to worry about. But for somebody leaner, there's just a lot more to take into consideration. And are you doing a show? And how lean do you want to get? Are you just trying to maintain? What are your goals with it? So, but I always start at that half mark and then go up, rather than starting really high and trying to come back down.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. I think the assumption was that you kind of started people on that, and it was held at that point for the whole diet, which would obviously, if you were struggling to eat that little food per day, it would get very difficult to stay on the diet. So if it's more of a case that you regulate it depending on how people respond, then that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, what usually happens is, so there's two types of people I've found. Well, there's more than two types, but there's two basic types that I found with Carb Nite. There are those who really enjoy their Carb Nite and they do a good job of making up their caloric deficit. And those people will always do the best with lower calories during the week. Maybe not what the initial prescription is, but still lower than what they need. And then there's a group that, oddly enough, just does not like to eat food on the Carb Nite. It's almost like a struggle for them to have, 2 ripe bananas. So that group, their caloric load during the week is closer to what their metabolic needs are, which actually, on average for most people is not as high as we think. Like in the United States, when people were a healthy body weight, women consumed about 1,500 calories a day and men consumed about 1,700 or 1,800 calories a day. So there's this whole misconception of what is your target caloric load, because we're given these recommendations of 2,000 calories a day for women and 2,500 calories a day for men, which statistically makes us fat. End of story, because that is what we do eat these days, and people just keep getting fatter. And when we didn't get fat, people ate actually quite a bit less per day. Again, this is on a carbohydrate-based diet, so it's hard to extrapolate that to a ketogenic diet because so many things change. You probably are looking at numbers where people could eat. Women could be up at the 1,700 mark, and most men could be at the 2,000 mark and still be in a caloric deficit metabolically.
And are those numbers you're citing there, is that assuming sedentary, or is that assuming activity?
That was so when Americans were consuming that low of calories, they were actually far more active than we are now.
Right. Okay.
So it's kind of funny. So we've got a double whammy. We're less active and we're eating more. Although there's been some really interesting studies about activity level and base metabolic needs, and they found in certain African populations they're literally running and walking all day long, almost every day, foraging for food or carrying the campsite around or caring for their children. And when they actually went through and they've got some really creative techniques now to track true energy utilization. And when they compared their energy use per day with an American's energy use per day who sits all day, they were almost identical. It's the body will become efficient enough to compensate for all of that activity by down-regulating energy usage until it hits this certain set point that apparently all humans pretty much have. We have this set point of energy utilization, and your body will either increase efficiency or decrease efficiency to maintain that. That's why I think that's some of the power in the diets I've created is I think utilizing a lot of those hormonal windows like I do either with Carb Nite over the week or the tricks that you use with Carb Back-Loading, I think that it prevents your body from being able to become that efficient because of the different fuel sources that you're forcing it to change between, that it's harder for it to get to that set point.
Okay. I know you've
Your response is after I give an answer like, okay.
well, I feel like you've covered everything. It's what do I say? But I wrote an article that went up on our site yesterday about why I don't think you should count calories.
Mm-hmm.
And in it I discussed the idea that the first law and the second law of thermodynamics kind of makes it a moot point to say that X calories in, X calories out equals weight loss or weight gain, simply because we can't know. And I think that's something you've discussed in the past, and it's kind of hinting at what you're saying there with regards to different efficiencies at different times of the day and different diets. But with assuming that, how would you begin to, so if you were training somebody that you'd never trained before, how would you start with regards to diet recommendations? Like, you must use a baseline of some description.
I do. There are a few pretty good calorimetry studies that essentially try to fit equations to the energy expenditure data from the study. And there's one in particular that I use, and I can't remember the name of the author from the paper I got it from, but it's basically the one I use, and it is based on lean body mass. And then what I'll do is there are a couple others that I'll augment it with. So for example, there's one equation that almost always goes high in my experience. It's almost always too many calories for a normal sedentary person. And there's another one that always seems too low. So what I'll do is I'll kind of use that window to create the meal plan. So I've got my baseline. I know what my kind of ideal target is, and then I'll use the other two to give me kind of a deviation. So one day maybe they're at the lower number, one day they're at the higher number, one day they're right on. That's where I usually start.
Okay. And I think it wouldn't be the Catch-McArdle formula, would it? The one you're talking about?
It might very well be. His name starts with a C, correct?
Right.
Catch. Yeah.
I think it might be a K, but I'm not sure.
It seems like the author starts with a C.
Okay.
Yeah, I've got the papers cataloged somewhere. I'll pick it out, and maybe I should write a paper on that because people ask all the time what do I use to determine the base calories when I work with somebody.
I think the one that we normally use is called the Catch-McArdle formula, and that's simply because it factors in body fat percentage and by proxy lean body mass.
Yeah.
Just because it seems the most relevant metric when calculating somebody's energy expenditure would be the body composition rather than just the height and weight and age.
Right.
But yeah. So that's very interesting. So you have a window which you consider to be a rough goal, and then you see how people respond from that point.
Right. And then, depending on the client and what their goal is and what I'm creating the plan for, I find that window of calories, and then I'll look at their protein needs within that window. And then that's where I'll come up with the absolute fat quantity that they're going to eat. If it's Carb Nite, that's the easiest one, because then it's just whatever the caloric deficit is, you throw it in with fat and you're done. For Carb Back-Loading, it's way more complex. I'll try to decide what their workload is like, how much of their fat I should front load in the day, what their fat content should be at night. And then it's literally guesswork from their activity and their body type, how much energy I think they're going to waste when I introduce the carbs at night.
Right.
Some people will go through just a ton of wasted thermal energy, and then others not so much. So that's kind of guesswork until I can get it pinned down from working with them.
Something that we've noticed with so I'd be right in thinking that you're saying that how hot you feel when you eat carbs is a determinant of how inefficient you are as a result of the carb feeding.
That is correct.
Yeah. So one thing we've noticed is that that's something that men seem to experience a lot more than women. And that women will often not feel the hot feeling and wake up in the night with the sweats kind of thing, whereas men will.
Yeah. Yeah, there's actually a reason for that. And that's because women, and I can't tell you why, but studies have found that women have an amazing ability to regulate blood sugar levels. Even with very intense workout, their body will try to preserve glycogen levels to make sure that they always have a very constant blood sugar level. So it's actually hard to get women to go through those kind of swings. And that's why they tend to require far more care and attention than men do on these plans.
Okay. The one thing I've found is that you should never backload in front of friends that are women, because they always get really frustrated.
That is probably the most important information that has come out in this podcast so far.
Yeah. Trying to answer the questions of why can't I do that? Like why do you get to eat the whole box of pastries and I can't?
Right.
Yeah, it tends not to go down well. So I remember you discussing that women's metabolisms are very different, and that they will readily go to burn glycogen over fat during low intensity states, and then not burn carbs during a training session.
Correct. So during normal day activity, they will slowly release glycogen to, like I talked about, maintain their blood sugar level. But then once they go into intense exercise, their body actually scales back and tries to protect their glycogen stores in favor of metabolizing fatty acids. So, it's interesting for a woman, the longer she works out, technically, the more fat she's going to burn. And I think this is one reason or one explanation why CrossFit actually isn't bad for some women for fat loss. It actually doesn't do too bad of a job. Whereas men, the most I've ever seen happen there is they just become shriveled up little boys. So, it's kind of this just difference in recognizing that there's different metabolic processes going on between the genders. And it can really help you fine-tune what their training is instead of just having one prescription for everybody.
Okay. Well, I'm glad I gave you an opportunity to bash CrossFit there.
Yes, thank you. I appreciate that. I was waiting for it.
Yeah, I was worried we weren't going to get it in.
Yeah, oh no. I don't think nothing ever goes by without some sort of CrossFit bash in there somewhere.
So does that mean then that I think a lot of women think that means that they then are constrained to low carb dieting for the rest of time, with kind of like one carb night or a few backloads a week, rather than being able to consistently eat carbs and hope to stay lean on it? Do you think would that be a kind of a grim but accurate answer?
I think it really depends on training intensity, because if you look at one mainstream example out there is Julia Ledusky, and she eats carbs almost every night, but her training is very intense. She's, the whole thing is, if your goal is if you're a woman and your goal is to be able to eat carbs every night, then you need to plan your training accordingly. You need to have intense training sessions. You need to, the body, they will let go of their glycogen stores, but they really have to force it to happen. So that means probably some extra HIIT sessions, do those prior to training, then do your resistance training. They can do it, but it's what's more important to them. And to me, what's an extra HIIT session on top of like a really intense workout? That should be their goal anyway. I think the big problem is in the women who don't do very well, they don't really have the right intensity level in the gym. And you can always tell because they ask, well, how do I know if my workout's intense enough? Well, if you have to ask, then it's not. Like, so that's yeah, that's it. So it is grim if the dedication level is not there, or you just don't enjoy the weight training that much. Then yeah, you are going to be constrained to a far more carbohydrate limited diet than men, and than your female peers who are willing to just like kill themselves in the gym. Well, not kill themselves, but like really put in the intense effort.
So I'll expect to see a lot of women training very intensely in the evenings from now on. Then
I
after
hope
that
so.
advice.
Yeah, that's why I am constantly ripping on people to just like give up the cardio, start hitting the weights. Cardio is not doing anything for you. But it's so hard to believe.
Okay. And you always advocate HIIT training in conjunction with weight training, don't you? So on the same day rather than, so you would, I believe you would advocate it in the morning or 30 minutes before?
Yeah, one of those two scenarios. It depends on which one of your goals is more relevant. If you're a female, you should definitely try to structure it before the training session. That has a couple advantages. For men and women, it increases mTOR activation when you actually do resistance train. And then for men, there is a greater increase in testosterone release during the training session as well. And then for women, the other advantage for them is they're creating a longer window of heightened glycogen and fat utilization during their training. If your goal is purely fat loss, then you should try to stage it first thing in the morning before you eat anything. That's going to be your best time to put it, no matter when you work out in the day, during the day.
Okay. And would you always suggest keeping your rest days as rest days, so to speak, and not doing a HIIT cardio session on a rest day?
I wouldn't always say that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
it's goal dependent.
Correct. And kind of on how you feel. If you feel like crap, then you shouldn't be forcing yourself to go do a HIIT session, because you'll probably do more damage than good. But in general, HIIT sessions done correctly are such a light kind of stressor on the body. And what I mean is, they're not going to, unless you're already screwed up, they're not going to like cause a huge cortisol release or huge amount of exhaustion or overtraining. So, done properly, those like short bursts, 8 cycles where you've got maybe 4 to 8 minutes total of intense output, you can do that on your rest days if you feel like.
Okay. All right. Well, I guess we've just got one more question. But it's a bit controversial, so I thought I'd leave it till last.
Oh, okay.
And it's about alcohol. So I think you can guess why it's controversial.
Yeah.
But I think in the past you've suggested if you're going to drink, to do so on a carb night, assuming that that's the diet you're following.
Correct.
That'd be correct? Yeah. So a question we get a lot is, I don't know whether you've ever read Martin Berkhan's advice on how to cope with alcohol in a diet.
Yeah, well, I read he had a really long article about it.
Yeah. In it, he essentially says restrict everything other than protein on that day, based on the assumption that alcohol causes temporary storage of whatever you've eaten previously?
Alcohol is very complex metabolically, and I've started to shift around how I use it with people. For example, in general, it's really easy. If you're just eating protein and fat, it's really simple. If alcohol is in your system, your body will try to stop burning everything else first until it burns up all the alcohol. That one's easy. That one's a no-brainer. So yeah, you will get some nutrients put into storage, and that's also probably the reason that alcohol consumed right before bed, pure alcohol, can be anti-catabolic. It can actually help preserve protein. So there are some advantages. There are ways to use it. I use it during contest prep and things like that. So it can be used as a tool. On Carb Nite, usually the reason I push it to there is the dynamics of what goes on when both glucose and alcohol is available in your system are incredibly complex. And the end result is that your body doesn't burn fat or protein, essentially. How it interplays between the carbs and the alcohol and potential ketone buildup anyway, and like all this crazy stuff that goes on. The end result is you can still get all the metabolic effects that you would normally get from the carbs. You've just got an extra fuel in there that's mucking up the works. So my thought was, if you really want the alcohol, then you should be staging it on your Carb Nite, because you get all the same effects. You just get this extra junk in there that, worst case scenario, will help you preserve some lean tissue through the night. Best case scenario is it's going to help you preserve some lean tissue through the night. Worst case scenario is you're going to wake up feeling like shit. So that's how I came to the conclusion that if you have it, you should have it on your Carb Nites.
Okay. And do you think then that Martin Berkhan talks about limiting dietary fat, heavily limiting dietary fat, so that you avoid any direct storage of that once you start drinking. And I'm assuming that, would that be the case, that it's different if you're using a cyclical keto setup, or do you not think that's so much of a concern?
Well, on Carb Nite, if you're doing it once a week, then yeah, it's not really a concern. Whatever you're going to force into fat cells, you're going to get back out. It's just there's only so much. I mean, most of these steps are rate limited, so there's only so much that's going to happen. It's one of, and I really shouldn't discuss this because now people are going to do it, but one of the more successful protocols with alcohol, particularly for young women and men who like to still go out and have drinks after work every day, is they'll get off work, they'll train, they'll have one meal with a lot of carbs in it, that's their backload, and then they'll wait about 2 hours, 3 hours, which you would think is ideally when the fats from that meal are going to get into your system. Then they'll start drinking, and they'll drink the rest of the night. That, oddly enough, doing that 2 to 3 times a week seems to have absolutely no effect on the utility of the diet.
Okay.
So I mean, I'll just be honest, alcohol metabolism is extremely complex when you start adding in carbohydrates at any time. And the best answer is, I don't know for sure. You know, I had a logic for why I put it on Carb Nite, which still seems to hold true, still works well. But as far as opening up how I've seen it used and how I've seen it used effectively, and the explanations for why it probably works in those scenarios, I've seen that there's far more scenarios that you can use, or that you can imbibe or drink alcohol and not worry about it.
So it may be the case that it has no effect on you, or it might ruin progress. You just need to see. I guess would be the answer. Yeah.
I guess that's the best answer. Yeah. I mean, to just come out and blanketly say, well, yes, alcohol is going to do this. If you have fat in your system, it's going to make it store. That's just not true. I mean, your body stops trying to metabolize it to a certain extent, but does that instantly mean that it's going to go into storage? And the answer is no. Sometimes, like for example, part of the interplay that's confusing when you have glucose and alcohol in your system at the same time is your body actually does not store fatty acids. It actually releases more than normal, which in people who have really poor clearance of fatty acids in particular, or glucose, those are the people who can actually get ketoacidosis from drinking. And these are somewhat healthy people. It's very rare, but the reason it's happening is they don't have the ability to clear the glucose, alcohol, and fatty acids all effectively fast enough. So the fatty acids get turned into ketones. The ketones need to get out. Their body can't get the ketones out fast enough. So just that scenario right there tells you there is something extremely wrong and false in the statement that drinking alcohol will force your body to store fat, because that is absolutely not the case. It might stop your body from burning fat, but the opposite's actually true. It will cause your body to release more, which could then potentially contribute to diabetes. People who are alcoholics have a higher risk of diabetes. That is probably why. So to make those kind of statements, to me at this point with the state of science, is asinine, to say the least.
Okay. Well, I guess that's just going to increase everybody's confusion, but
I'm sure
not
it will.
its fault, but
And probably it'll just cause more. What's the right word I'm looking for? When people like to make up these rivalries between me and other fitness professionals, and I don't understand, because most of them I've never talked to, and most of them I actually like a lot of the things they have to say. There just might be one or two very, very minor things we disagree on, and it turns into this big battle royale where Kiefer needs to be in a cage match with 7 different guys.
Well, it's when you made your fasting recommendation and everybody said that you were going to get into trouble because Martin Berkhan said that 16 hours was best, and you said that 12 to 14 hours were best.
Yeah.
And it's just the recommendation's not that different.
Right, I know. That's what I couldn't understand. I was like, worst case scenario, we differ by 2 hours.
Yeah.
I mean, who's really going to be upset about that?
I guess the people that want to see you have an argument with Martin Berkhan.
Yeah, I guess.
Which I suppose would be entertaining, but aside from that, I don't understand why people seem to want to pitch everybody's ideas against each other, but it seems to happen an awful lot.
It does. I think it's just some great entertainment value for people. They're bored.
I think so. Okay, well, I guess that concludes all of the questions that we've had. So it's been a very informative hour and 20 minutes. I've learned a lot, and I guess so have all of our readers, and hopefully some of yours. So
yeah, I'm glad I didn't disappoint.
No, never do. Thanks a lot for the opportunity.
Yeah, no problem. Glad to have you on the show. Like I said, I kind of wanted you on my show this time because you had me on your show last time. So I thought we'd do it.
I think you can only call it a show when you've had more than one person on it.
Yeah, that's true.
But yeah, no, it's been a privilege to be on BioJacked. I listen to your podcast quite a bit, so it's strange being involved in one of the episodes for a change.
That's cool. Well, yeah, if you want to hang on the line here for a minute, I'm going to go ahead and sign off and tell everybody thanks for listening to another episode of BioJacked. And we had Jonathan Watson on from Propane Fitness. If you want to tell them where they can find you guys and how they can get in contact with you, go ahead.
Yeah, sure. So it's www.propanefitness.com is the main blog. We've got a forum where there's quite a big growing community on there of people of different abilities, where I log my training, and so do the other 2 editors, Yusuf and Ben. And then we have a Facebook page and a Twitter account. So through any of those means, you can get in touch with us.
All right, great. Great having you on the show, and that concludes another episode of BioJacked Radio. See everybody later.